Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market assets were down today as we saw expectations of an aggressive interest rate cut by the US Fed dwindling on the day. MSCI's index for emerging market stocks dropped about 0.4%. Now, across Africa's major markets, South Africa's JSE was down as we saw investors dial back expectations from the US Fed on rates. Banks and financials were down on the day. In Nigeria, MTN was down almost 1.5%. We saw consumer goods firms like Nigerian breweries and NASCON also a drag on the all-share index today. Now, also coming up on the show, Kenya's finance minister, along with 26 others, are behind bars over corruption charges. Another high-profile resignation as Boris Johnson looks set to become the UK's next Prime Minister. And an Italian restaurant raises the stakes with cannabis-infused pizzas in South Africa. Well, let's start off the show in Kenya, where an ongoing graft probe has claimed its first major casualty. The country's finance minister has been detained by police following orders from the director of public prosecution. Now, Henry Rotich, his accounting officer, and 26 other officials are accused of financial misconduct and conspiracy to defraud taxpayers in a multi-million-dollar dam project. Here's CGTN's Robert Nagila with more.
4 months after he was first questioned by police over corruption allegations, Kenya's Finance Minister Henry Rotich was detained on Monday on orders from the public prosecutor over corruption allegations.
I have today directed the DCI to effect the arrest and immediate arraignment before court of the accused persons named below herein. 1. Henry Kiplagat Rotich, Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury.
The charges against Rotich originate from a police investigation into the misuse of funds in a dam project overseen by Italian construction company CMC di Ravenna. The public prosecutor alleges the two dams were budgeted to cost $446 million, but that figure was inflated by $170 million. However, despite the government releasing $190 million, work has never commenced on the project. The public prosecutor has demanded that Rotich, who will be charged alongside 27 other senior officials, including the accounting officer at the Treasury Department, and Italian national Paolo Pacelli, the director of CMC di Ravenna, step down from his position as cabinet secretary.
They will have to step aside. It's not two ways.
Okay.
These are not governors. They are not, but this is a process that I will write to the head of public service.
Rotich and his co-accused face 8 charges ranging from conspiracy to defraud and financial misconduct.
Mr. Speaker,
the minister has denied any wrongdoing. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's delve further into this story. We are joined by Robert Nagila himself in the studio. Great to have you with us, Robert. Well, let's examine this. This is one of Kenya's highest profile arrests that we have seen in a while for corruption. Does the state sound confident in the case they have against the minister and these 26 other officials? And do you think that they will follow through to the end, especially when it comes to appropriate consequences?
Absolutely. Just listening to the Director of Public Prosecutions this morning at his press briefing when he made the announcements about the arrests, he laid out a timeline from September 2018 when they first got word that there could have been some irregularities in this particular project. It's 2 dams we're talking about, to February 2019, when the preliminary investigation had been done by the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, up until June 2019, when that file was then handed over to the directorate, to the public prosecutor.
Right.
It's at that point that the finance minister and several other individuals were then questioned. Now, he was questioned for about 12 hours. He recorded several statements. He was back the day after again to complete that, to complete his statements.
Right.
And then it all went quiet. Now, it turns out what was happening behind the scenes was because of the uproar that came on as a result, the political fiasco that surrounded this particular case as well. That they decided, you know what, we're not going to prosecute this particular case in the public domain. We need to go out. They engaged British investigators, Italian investigators as well, to try and build up a case. And that's what they've been doing all this time. So by the time he appeared this morning on local TV, he was confident that he had a case against the individuals that were named this morning.
All right. Well, have we heard anything yet from the Finance Minister, Henry Rotich, or his permanent secretary? Have they responded so far to these allegations?
No, they've not responded as yet. What we do know is that it was a well-coordinated plan by the Public Prosecutor's Office and the police. As soon as the statements had been read out at the press conference, the arrests began. Now, we are told by our sources that the finance minister and his deputy, who's the accounting officer at Treasury, the Ministry of Finance, drove themselves to the Directorate of Criminal Investigations and were immediately detained.
Right.
Now, we understand that they will record some statements. The authorities need to clarify some of the statements they'd given earlier with some of the investigations, some of the details they've come up with in the investigations. So we expect them to be arraigned in court either tomorrow or in the coming days, but they will spend the night in police cells.
Right. Now, what happens to the Finance Minister, Henry Rotich, given the fact that President Uhuru Kenyatta had said that if a government official is charged, then they automatically lose their position? So what happens to him, given the fact that Kenya's economy is also at a sensitive period right now?
And we did see some movement from the shilling as soon as this announcement was made.
Right.
Now, we're talking about the individuals who are in charge of the finance ministry, the country's finances and the economy at large. So there was bound to be some movement. Now, the president was very clear in his statement to the country earlier this year, where he said that, look, if you're charged with corruption, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to step down. And it does appear that that is what they're waiting for. Now, speaking to some of my political sources, they were saying, look, there's absolutely no way they would have made this arrest without informing the head of state that they were going to make this arrest because of the ripple effect that this was likely to have within the economy and within the country at large as well. So what they're waiting for, we understand, is for them to be charged in court. Now, once they're charged in court, we do expect them to step aside. We heard from the public prosecutor saying, look, he's going to speak to the head of the civil service, saying that, look, as soon as they're charged, they have to step aside because there is that likelihood that they could interfere with the investigations, which are still ongoing. So we expect that as soon as they're charged in court, they will have to step aside. And we expect to see either a mini reshuffle or individuals in acting capacity replace the current crop of leadership that we're talking about.
And on that note, there is some speculation that we could see the next finance minister or the next acting finance minister come from within his cabinet. Are there any names being put out there just yet?
As yet, no. It's a very dicey issue. So the president will have to tread carefully because it has some political connotations. We know that the last time, as soon as this case came up earlier this year, there was a lot of political heat around it. There was a certain community feeling that, look, we're being targeted. Why is it that it's only people from our community who are being talked about in this particular regard to this case? So he's going to have to tread very carefully. We believe that we could, one of two things, either get somebody in acting capacity from within the cabinet itself, but that ministry is so huge and you're dealing with a lot as well, or he may go outside. Now, if he does go outside, then you're looking at the finance minister being permanently replaced.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for giving us that update. We know you're following that story, and we look forward to hearing where it goes. Of course, that was Robert Nagila, CGTN's correspondent, joining us here in the studio. Well, let's move on now to South Africa, where miner Amplats' half-year revenue more than doubled in the 6 months through June. The precious metals producer's headline earnings per share for the period rose by 120% to stand at about $2.02 per share. Now, this comes as the company benefited from a rally in some of its key metals. With the details, here's CGTN's Angela Kupola.
The first half results were strong and featured headline earnings per share at up 120% to 28.15 Rand. EBITDA is up 82% to 12.4 billion Rand, while return on capital employed doubled to 45%.
And net cash improved from 2.9 billion at the end of December to 6 billion at the end of June. And consistent with our dividend policy, we've declared a first half cash dividend of 11 Rand per share, totaling some 3 billion Rand.
While these numbers are solid, there are some concerns in terms of costs.
We are going to see increased costs from Eskom still being part of our business. Mining inflation still will be at about 7.5%, but we think that we can come by the end of the year well within the guidance that we've provided to the market, which will be below mining inflation.
As the company releases their financials, the platinum sector is starting wage negotiations with AMCU, the dominant union.
Now, the problem with wage negotiations is if in the good years you give a 15%, 20% wage increase, in the bad years you can't give a minus 50. So what they do is they try to keep the base rate, let's say 6, 7, 8%, something related to inflation, but then just give a bonus during the good years.
While shareholders will be happy with the 6-month performance, the unions will use the results as a negotiating tool.
Mandelbult, which is a conventional underground mine, 60% of its costs are either labor or contractors. So if you were to embed an unsustainable increase in that cost, what you can do is put a Mandelbult out of business. So what you want to make sure is that there may be other discussions outside of the base wages that we'll have with the unions.
But the future is really, really rosy. So longer term, I'm very happy, but no one must forget this is primarily a commodity company. So these results were excellent, but 3 years ago the results were terrible.
A good set of results by anybody's measurement, but there's some caution being exercised if that commodity price does change. I'm Angelo Coppola for CG10 in Sandton, South Africa.
And now look at some other corporate headlines for the day. South Africa is set to ramp up support for its ailing state-owned power utility, Eskom, with an additional $4.2 billion spread over the next 2 years. Now, the firm will get around $2 billion of the money this year and around $2.4 billion in 2020 to 2021. Eskom is seen as the biggest risk to South Africa's economy as the entity continues to drown in about $32 billion worth of debt. A Nigeria and German company, Siemens, has agreed on a roadmap to nearly triple the country's reliable power supply by 2023. Africa's largest economy at the moment has an installed capacity of about 13,000 megawatts. On average, it produces over 5,000 megawatts, out of which only 4,000 gets to its electricity consumers. And India's national carrier, Air India, is set to resume its direct flights from Mumbai to the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, from September. The airline will fly 4 times a week, saving the long hours spent on flight layovers. The direct flights are expected to cut travel time from between 10 and 11 hours to just 6 hours. And German carrier Lufthansa has resumed daily direct flights to Cairo. That's following a 1-day suspension. Over the weekend, the airline temporarily suspended all its flights to the Egyptian capital, a decision that came a couple of hours after the British government warned of a heightened risk of terrorism against aviation. We'll bring you an extensive update on this a little later on the show. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a short break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. Could Eritrea have finally agreed to join the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? We find out. And British Airways grounds its flights to Cairo over security concerns.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Now, the AU has selected Ghana to host the Secretariat for the African Continental Free Trade Area beginning next year. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai sat with the Director of Projects of the Ghana Export Promotion Authority, Alexander Dadzawa, to find out how Ghana is gearing up for this move.
So what does it mean for Ghana hosting the African Continental Free Trade Area?
It's a good sign for us. Already, Ghana's democracy is touted. The place is a peaceful place, and everybody who wants to do business would want a peaceful environment for the business to thrive. And we couldn't have chosen a better country than Ghana, seeing the level of our democracy, and now backed by the economic prospects that we have.
Ghana's manufacturing sector is still a thriving one. So how prepared is the country to fully trade with other African countries now that this free trade area is going to take off from 2020?
The president made it clear that he wants to industrialize the economy of Ghana from a raw material, exporting country into a value-added processing economy. And so this agenda has been there long enough for us to know what we are supposed to do as far as, the Continental Free Trade Agreement implementation is concerned. So I think all these are factored properly and situated well within the strategy that Ghana has as a country going forward.
Movement of people from one African country to the other is still very expensive when you look at the aviation sector, and also the road and the rail networks are still not the best. There are concerns that the free trade area may not succeed if all these issues are not addressed. Why now jump to implement the agreement?
When is the right time to do it? There's no right time. And every time is right time, depending on what you want to do. So the stimulation of the process of integrating our economies will itself push, for a faster development of the space. So if there is much more activity going on within Africa, it will force aviation to do something about that. And that alone will force prices to come down. A lot more is going to happen, a lot more, because there is something good in peer review. So when, for example, a neighboring country of South Africa has seen, let's say Botswana or Namibia has seen the lead that South Africa has made in making sure that Ghana comes more easily into their country, the others are going to follow suit. So I can see that as a good sign of opening up, because now that economically we are integrated, the rest of it is that we should open our borders to everybody else to come in.
Now, Eritrea is set to become the 55th African state to sign the continent's free trade agreement. Of course, the pact establishes the largest free trade area in the world, with a continent-wide market of about 1.2 billion people, worth $2.5 trillion US. It officially went into force at the 12th Extraordinary Summit of the African Union earlier this month, which held place in Niamey, Niger. Well, let's find out more about this from CGTN's Girum Chala. He joins us now in Addis Ababa. Girum, great to have you on the show. Now, Eritrea did not ink this agreement in the past, and we know that's because of its long-running conflict with Ethiopia. Well, there's a new peace accord between the two countries. Why then is the country still on the outside of this agreement? Girum, can you hear me? Well, it looks like we don't have a Girum right now. Well, let's move on as we wait to get him back online. Now, the signing of a power-sharing agreement between Sudan's military rulers and protest leaders is long overdue. It will provide a chance to conclude a political crisis that has kept protesters on the streets of the country for months. But according to analysts, the challenge ahead for Sudan is to rebuild its shattered economy. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with more.
The Sudan economy has been suffering the effects of political instability, civil strife, and years of an economic embargo by the US on former President Omar al-Bashir.
The foreign currency revenue has dropped drastically since the secession of South Sudan, as 85% of oil revenue has gone to the south. But the country has never put up a plan to create alternative sources of revenue. The result is that there is no income. While the subsidies on petroleum products are huge, this led to fast-growing debt and inflation, which has reached 70%. There is not enough foreign currency in the market, not enough to even support import of paper to print the local currency. Obviously, poverty has struck the population at high levels.
The peace deal signed by the political forces entails establishing a new government. Experts say this government should focus on rebuilding the economy.
It is one of the most important economies in Africa, but it is also one of the poorest 20 nations worldwide. There's so much wealth in natural resources, in fuel, in rich agricultural land, in animal stock. There's an abundance of reserves in minerals, iron, copper and gold. There's a lot to build on.
There is huge potential in Sudan if well managed. But Sudan cannot depend on itself for economic recovery. It needs the support of the international community. And the first to offer this support were Gulf Arab nations, Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates, in addition to Egypt. The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have already pledged $3 billion in soft loans to support the state budget. They've also delivered over 600,000 tons of wheat, in addition to shipments of fuel, medicine and food. A host of investment opportunities are also expected from several countries, including China, to revitalize the economy.
Investments should be in agriculture, which already constitutes 2/3 of the GDP. There are 200 million hectares of arable land. Sudan can be self-sufficient and even feed Africa if cultivated. There must be investments in industries and mining to create jobs, as unemployment reached 40% now. Then there's livestock with 120 million cattle in Sudan, enough to cover the needs of the whole continent.
Some experts believe Sudan should learn from Egypt's aggressive economic reforms that were undergone after the 2013 uprising. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, as we mentioned earlier in the show, British Airways has suspended flights to Cairo. That's following security concerns. Now, the British government is yet to issue a travel warning, of course, on that heightened risk of terrorism against aviation. Well, Yasser Hakim joins us in Cairo to give us, to make the situation more clearer. Yasser, great to have you on the show. Now, according to British Airways, this move was a precaution to allow for further assessment. They also said the concerns are not related to security concerns with the Cairo airport. So is it clear, Yasser, right now, why that sudden decision to suspend flights to Cairo?
Nothing yet, Uche. Everyone is puzzled here why this step by the British Airways and why not make it clear the reason for this. There is anger within the government, within the public opinion about this decision that they felt could damage Egypt's aviation or tourism reputation at the time when this is a high season for tourism, and there has not been any signs of any security lapse or issues in Egypt. The AFCON, for example, has just ended with more than 24 countries, and fans from these 24 countries and media from around the world were covering the event in Egypt, and there were no security issues there, and everything went smooth. So why at this point, and why is this happening? There's no answer yet to the Egyptian authorities from BA.
Right, but have we heard anything from the British Foreign Office, Yasser? Have they issued a warning against air travel from Cairo? And have we heard any response from Egypt's government to this event?
Yes, the Egyptian government has shown its anger and it has summoned the British ambassador who met with the Egyptian foreign minister and has given an official apology to the Egyptian government for this situation, and also confirmed that there is no security concerns against Egypt from the foreign ministry in the UK or from the Ministry of Transportation, and that this action was only by the British Airways alone, and there was no information or no derivatives or statements from the foreign ministry in the UK concerning any security issues with Egypt. At the same time, the head of the office in the British Airways office in Cairo has also issued a statement saying there is no security concerns with Egypt, and that the flights will resume on the 26th of July, and he confirmed the resumption of flights on the 26th, but he also did not say why British Airways has decided to stop flights or cancel flights for a week. So again, yes, there has been apology. Yes, there has been confirmation that there's no security issues with Egypt. However, there's still no reply on why the cancellation has taken place.
Right. Now, this must have raised huge concerns for Egypt, because the 2015 plane crash was a major hit to the country's tourism sector. Has this now revived worries about the travel and tourism sector in Egypt?
Well, obviously, it can have some repercussions. However, there was no signs of this. If you look at another airways, which is Lufthansa, which also decided to cancel the flights to Egypt, Lufthansa itself resumed flights only 24 hours later. So there was no repercussions on that. The flights from the UK to other resorts in Egypt, to other cities in Egypt, continue as it is. The charter flights also continue to the Red Sea and to other areas in Egypt. And also all other airlines are continuing their flights normally. So obviously it has not had the effects that Egyptians had feared. And therefore it might not affect the tourism season at the moment until everything is clear why this has happened. But so far it has only been affected or limited to the British Airways flights for 1 week, and in response Egypt Air has increased its flights and the capacity of its planes, or have been using larger planes for any flights to and from the UK to make up for the visitors who might have had their flights cancelled on British Airways, that they can also resume their flights on Egypt Air. So it has had a limited effect so far for the aviation and for the tourism industry in Egypt.
Right. Well, many thanks for that update, Yasser. Of course, that was Yasser Hakim joining us there in Cairo. Well, let's go back to one of our top stories. Eritrea may soon become the 55th African state to join or to sign that Africa Continental free trade area. We don't know just yet, but let's find out more about this from Girum Chala. He joins us now in Addis Ababa. Girum, great to have you on the show. Hope you can hear me now. Now, Eritrea didn't ink this agreement in the past because of its long-running conflict with Ethiopia. There's a new peace accord in place since last year. Why is the country still on the outside of this agreement?
Good evening, Uche. Eritrea, as you understand, has been alienated from the rest of the continent for a long time. But when it comes to the Continental Free Trade Area, it's been part of it until 2015. But then again, when things got technical and it needed technical experts to be on board to do the Continental Free Trade Areas, negotiations and agreements, then that's when it came out of it because of the conflict situation between Ethiopia and Eritrea, and Addis Ababa being the headquarters, it didn't happen. Now, it's another story. So far, just to answer your question very simply, Uche, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is about negotiation. It's about what is good for my country and how am I going to comply with the situation. Eritrea now is planning to understand the Continental Free Trade Area because it's been behind. Its experts don't know much about it. They want to come on board. And for that, I've been talking to their diplomats here in Addis Ababa earlier, and they've been telling me there is a plan with the African Union, especially with the Trade and Industry Department, which is in charge of the CSC itself, to update, to bring on board all Eritrean technical people in the Ministry of Trade of their country, and even the whole government itself, so that at the end of the day, they can decide to be part of this process. So the journey has started. They didn't come on board in the first place, but now they are willing to do so because ultimately they are the only country which are not part of this important African initiative.
Of course, one huge question that comes up is the country ready to participate in this deal? It's been about a year since that peace deal was signed with Ethiopia. Has there been significant change in terms of relations between the two nations and certainly Eritrea's economic outlook?
Look, Eritrea needs whatever economic integration it can get. And what we have talked about, the Continental Free Trade Area, is one of the good news for it. Its trade relationship with Ethiopia is now picking up. It's been paused for almost 2 decades, as you know. Ethiopia is now, taking advantage of the situation there because of the low base of Eritrea. Ethiopians are exporting grains and others. But then again, there is an advantage from the Eritrean part that Ethiopia has started somehow using the Massawa port. Some exports are being done through that. And then there is a huge advantage from the Eritrean side when Ethiopia starts using the Assab port, which before the war, it was one of the best outlets for Ethiopia. That after the war, it was diverted to Djibouti. So there are, almost readinesses here and there, construction of roads to Assab and other places, so that Ethiopia can integrate itself economically with Eritrea. The Ethiopian Prime Minister, having in mind the 1-year anniversary of the air connectivity between the two countries, was there a few days back in Asmara. They have talked about the air transport connectivity to be strengthened between the two countries. By the way, since that reconnection of air flights, there were 100,000 people which were transported between Addis Ababa and Eritrea, and that's a huge number, despite the fact that the two countries were not working for a long time. So they are trying to strengthen the transportation sector. They are trying to strengthen the port service sector. And at the same time, they are trying to strengthen the people-to-people relationship, which the peace itself can be sustained on. So on the Eritrean part, they are happy. But then again, they are always asking regulations. The two countries need to come up with certain type of agreement so that the trade activity can be done in a much more modern and also law-abided manner, Uche.
Quite interesting. Well, many thanks for that update, Girum. Of course, that's Girum Chala joining us there in Addis Ababa by phone. Now, of course, you're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now. Still to come. Another high-profile resignation as Boris Johnson looks set to become the UK's next Prime Minister. And trading kicks off in Shanghai's new Science and Tech Innovation Board.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. Business in Africa is high risk. After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN. Well, here's a recap of today's top headlines. The number of people killed after a suicide bomber stormed a security checkpoint in Mogadishu before detonating an explosive-laden vehicle has reached 17. Now, Al-Shabaab has taken credit for the blast, claiming to have targeted senior government officials. And the Democratic Republic of Congo's health minister, Oli Ilunga, has resigned. This follows the announcement that the government was stripping the team of control over the response to the Ebola outbreak. Now, the latest outbreak has so far killed at least 1,700 people and infected more than 800 others. And President Cyril Ramaphosa is challenging an official report from the country's corruption watchdog that says he had deliberately misled Parliament over a campaign donation. He now seeks an urgent judicial review of the report that suggests he committed a money laundering offense. And that's a recap of today's headlines. Well, shifting focus to international news, British Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt has announced a joint European-led maritime mission to protect ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the latest move comes after the seizure of a British-flagged tanker last week. It also follows a signal from the United States that it will not aid the UK in the Persian Gulf.
Iran has tried to present this as a tit-for-tat incident, following the government of Gibraltar's action on the 4th of July to enforce EU sanctions by preventing the Iranian chartered tanker Grace 1 from supplying oil to Syria. But there is simply no comparison between Iran's illegal seizure of a vessel inside a recognised shipping lane, where the Stena Impero had every right to be, and the enforcement of EU sanctions against a tanker that had freely navigated into the waters of a British overseas territory. So we must now take appropriate action to support the safe passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. As well as speaking again to my Iranian counterpart, I've also spoken this weekend and today to the foreign ministers of Oman, the United States, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, Spain and Denmark. The new force will be focused on free navigation, bearing in mind that 1/5 of the world's oil, 1/4 of its liquefied natural gas, and trade worth $500 billion passes through the Strait of Hormuz every year. It will not be part of the US maximum pressure policy on Iran because we remain committed to preserving the Iran nuclear agreement.
Meanwhile, a British minister has resigned before the country's presumed new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, takes office. Now, Johnson is expected to launch a policy to lead Britain out of the European Union without a deal. The resignation of Alan Duncan underlines the strength of feeling in the governing Conservative Party against a no-deal Brexit. Many businesses also feel this could be catastrophic for the economy. Now, his resignation follows the exit of Margot James, who described the promise to leave EU without a deal as a move against business organizations. If the polls are right, Johnson will ramp up preparations for a no-deal exit to try to force changes to the previous agreement, which we saw Prime Minister Theresa May seal. Well, let's turn our attention now to Shanghai, where trading started today on the new Science and Tech Innovation Board. The opening of the star market for science and tech companies on the Shanghai Stock Exchange aims to provide additional support for China's growing tech sector. Here's Chen Tong with more.
The sound of the gong marked a new start for China's stock exchanges. The stock market began trade this morning, joining the expected surge of investor interest. The 25 companies that launched on the new board rose by an average of 140% during the day. Most of them focus on IT, advanced equipment, or biomedicine, and getting a stock market listing could mean a significant boost to their development.
Our company is special because we moved from the main board to the star board. We are actually an old company, 35 years old. The star market is better suited to our company though, so we decided to move to the star.
It's a milestone for our company and will let us leapfrog our development. Medical equipment products are quite niche and few people pay much attention to them. This listing will get us more attention. It's a great development.
But why the stock market should give more impetus to tech companies? The board's registration-based system also means higher requirements for the companies that do list there.
The fundamental characteristic of the new board is the registration-based system, which emphasizes information disclosure. That will be a challenge to listed companies because you have to disclose the information as clearly as you can to let more investors know about the company.
It takes only 9 months for the stock market to move from a concept to a real board that allows trading in China's youngest and most daring companies. The market has so far received more than 140 applications, which will now be reviewed in the light of the results from the debut of today's 25.
The star market is the way of the future. People will be watching to see how strict the procedures are and how marketized the board will be. The star market should be a robust new way to inject capital support into China's small and middle-sized companies quickly and effectively.
The Shanghai Stock Exchange and China Securities Index announced Friday that they will be releasing an index to follow the performance of stock market firms. According to the exchange, the index will follow internationally accepted compilation methods, basing its selection of 50 stocks with the highest overall rating based on market value and liquidity. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Meanwhile, Malaysia has imposed a new tax on sweetened beverages that exceed a specified level of sugar. The move aims to fight rampant obesity and diabetes in the Southeast Asian country. Now, studies suggest Malaysians are the most overweight people amongst Asian nations, with almost half the population being overweight or obese. Although the tax is hardly going to change that picture overnight, health policy specialists say it is a good start. Here's Rian Melzer reporting from Kuala Lumpur.
Where once obesity would have been rare in this tropical country, it is now the norm, and it's placing a heavy burden on people's health and Malaysia's healthcare system. To try to reverse the trend, the government has imposed a tax of 10 cents per litre on sugary drinks such as sodas, but also fruit juices. The tax is imposed at the importer and manufacturer level.
It is something of an incentive for manufacturers to consciously reduce the levels of sugar within their individual products, rather than depend on consumers themselves reducing their sugar intake, which is unreliable and does not produce the kind of outcomes that we would want to see in addressing this crisis that we have in Malaysia.
Some manufacturers confirm they will reformulate their beverages to avoid the tax, but it's still only a start. The vast majority of sugary drinks that Malaysians regularly consume are made on premises, like the traditional teh tarik or pulled tea, made with lashings of condensed milk.
But as well, we go on a roadshow, a massive campaign to educate on how or why you're going to avoid sugary drinks in the light of overweight and obesity. I think that's the way forward for us. We've got to tackle it on both ends, from the demand side and from the supply side.
It will take time to change people's tastes and behavior.
This move is a timely and innovative approach to trying to address the issue of obesity in Malaysia in a very sustainable and long-term manner.
To try to get Malaysians on track for a more healthy diet and lifestyle. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
Now let's turn to the U.S. city of San Diego, where visitors to this year's Comic-Con festival were in for a big surprise. Well, CGTN's Mark New is at the festival and filed this report.
4 days of activities here at Comic-Con, plus another preview night. That's a total of 5 days of festivities that are wrapping up right here at the San Diego Convention Center. More than 135,000 people attended. Many of them come dressed for success. Take a look at the photo op wall of Comic-Con here. You can see many of these people attending spend months preparing their outfits. Also, some interesting announcements at Comic-Con, including some involving big stars. Perhaps no bigger and more surprising was movie star Tom Cruise dropping by unannounced.
And I felt that it was my responsibility to finally really deliver for you. And I have a little piece here if you want to see it. This is our very first trailer. You are the first people in the world to see it.
That movie is a trailer for Top Gun Maverick, the sequel to the original Top Gun, coming 34 years later. Cruise calls the film a love letter to aviation. The film is slated to hit theaters in the summer of 2020.
And the Marvel Universe added some diversity, announcing Natalie Portman would be the new Thor, and that Canadian-Chinese Simu Liu has been cast in the role of Chinese superhero Shang-Chi, who will star in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings in February of 2021.
And on the very edge of the exhibition hall is the Special Artists Alley. Some complain that this area has gotten smaller and smaller over the years as industry powerhouses take up more space. But this is the place where you can purchase directly from the comic book artists themselves, original artwork or prints. Many people say this is the heart and soul of what Comic-Con is all about. Mark New, CGTN, San Diego.
And moving on now, here's a look at how commodities performed today. Gold prices steadying after falling 1% in the previous session on lowered expectations of a big interest rate cut by the US Fed. However, the metal's overall momentum remains supported by global geopolitical uncertainties right now. Meanwhile, oil prices rising more than 2% on concerns that Iran's seizure of a British tanker last week may lead to supply disruptions in the energy-rich Gulf. Well, let's take a quick break now, still to come. An Italian restaurant raises the stakes with cannabis-infused pizzas in South Africa.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, pizza franchise called Cacio has launched South Africa's first ever Daga pizza. They come lightly dressed with cannabidiol, which is a non-hallucinogenic chemical extract of cannabis, as they leave the oven. Now, Cacio's pizza contains a dose large enough for a light effect, but not enough to stop you from driving. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with this story.
If you see a green goddess or not so plain Mary Jane on the menu, you're not in a weed cafe in Amsterdam, but rather at Cacio, an Italian pizza joint in South Africa.
One of our brand values has always been innovation. So we've always tried to stay ahead in terms of food trends, health trends, etc. And obviously CBD is the latest health trend, and so we decided to launch a pizza range that had CBD oil in it.
Cacaccio's new pizza offerings are served with a dash of cannabis oil and come in meat and vegetarian options.
The Green Goddess has got the roasted zucchini, feta, basil, and then the CBD oil on it. And the Not So Plain Mary Jane is a spicy tomato base, then got mozzarella, freshly cooked chicken, roasted mushrooms, pepper dews.
A pizza at lunch won't land you in the hot box either. South Africa's health ministry lifted restrictions temporarily on cannabis oil or CBD products with a maximum dose of 20 milligrams.
The CBD oil is the healthy component of the cannabis plant. The extract you can take is CBD or THC. THC is what you're going to use that's going to make you high, whereas CBD doesn't at all. You can still go back to work after having the pizza. You can still pick up your kids from school.
So let's tuck in and see what it's all about. It's delicious. You can't taste the CBD oil, but it's very tasty. There's been a burst of cannabis products on the market like lollipops, energy drinks and beer since it was decriminalized in September last year. The deregulation of CBD could be a further boost for the industry, which is estimated to grow to around $2 billion over the next few years. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, on that note, let's take a quick look at Africa's currencies before we go. Kenya shilling weakening against the dollar today, and that's due to oil importer demand and excess liquidity in the country's money markets. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand firmer today as focus remains on U.S. monetary policy. However, analysts are saying the ongoing battle between President Ramaphosa and the public protector, that may have a minor effect on the rand as it poses a threat to Ramaphosa's promise of structural reforms in the country. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.